embarked on this process for a resilience plan. Uh, Probably this talk was around the beginning of the year, but they've officially brought on the Perkins and Will team in June of this year. The resilience plan is a lot about the community and how the community can adapt and change to meet, some type of an event. Some are weather related, some could be economic related, and as we know right now with the COVID case, that there can also be a health component. Um, and not all events are negative. I mean, the community could be looking at a tremendous job growth and not be able to fill jobs. And so this resilience plan looks for how the city can be prepared, but it's also how it can be maintain a health and well-being. Resilience planning works to make a community sustainable, adaptable, and regenerative. This can be achieved through a combination of things such as diversity, foresight, the capability to act when an event happens, um, cohesion or self-organization, and a learning process. Um, this To start the process, the city identified a core team that consisted of members of the public of the city, and these are Stephanie Sheets, who's director of community development, myself, who is the lead planner and work in the planning department, Jennifer Rodenbeck, the director of finance and business operations, Maria Perez, who's the city stormwater specialist, Mike Nyman, and who's the water reclamation manager at Cedar Falls Utilities, and Mike Litterer, who's director of customer service and business. And our community members were Carol Yates, Mark Miller, Brady Gruen, and then we had Eric Giddens, who is with UNI, but he's with their energy education and outreach. Those core team members got together and come up with a group of people to serve on steering committees, which are tied to the 6 topics that we'll be talking about through this presentation. Those committees consisted of 35 members of the community and organizations in the community with backgrounds or experience on those topics. The first topic was the ecology, land, and habitat, and this looked at things like invasive species, biodiversity, endangered species of insects, animals, plants, just water quality. And the one thing about a resilience plan is that while we have 6 topics, each one is woven into a fabric and it affects each one. And that's why this plan is really about the community, because how the community may be affected by different aspects of these plans, and different people within the community are affected differently. The second topic was water, weather, and urban flooding. And that, sort of looked at the change in weather patterns. We looked at increasing rain intensity, the severity of windstorms. So we had this derecho this summer. The third topic was energy, mobility, and transportation. And that looked at utilities, consumption of fuel and utilities, walkability, accessibility, and alternative forms of ride are all part of mobility. And people think about walkability and they think of, are sidewalks good? Well, you can have sidewalks in a community, but if they're not easily accessible, if they're not comfortable for the public, those can become issues. Transportation, public transportation, the use of electric vehicles, these are all things that can add to the resilience of a community. Then there's the community cohesion and civic services. And this was to get an understanding of what programs and services are currently out there and how to support and complement them. Equity, diversity, and well-being. And this is one of those keys to growing a community is diversity. And to growing a community also means to grow those people within a community that may be from different areas, such as income. They may have physical challenges. The well-being is, the stress. People that in areas that maybe have some issues with accessibility, diversity, that can add to stress, which affects the community as a whole. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, jobs, business, and the economy. When there's an economic downturn and unemployment affects the community, we try to figure out ways to do that. But there is a flip side to that. how does a robust economy affect the quality and specialization of labor? These are things that we have looked at and found out through the public workshops. There were the public workshops started out for the core team. They did meetings in late September, or steering committee members all met in late September and looked at these 6 topics. And then we had public engagement workshops during the latter 2 weeks of October. Of these, we had 51 members that participated in those workshops. There were 20 people that participated in self-guided workshops during the same time frame, and these were available online and had pre-recorded messages that pertained to the workshops. And then there were 2 online surveys that covered the built environment and ecology, and there were 285 people who participated in those. And then there was 1 survey with community and local economic, local economy, and there were 190 participants in those. So this has been I won't say a long-term meeting leading up to this, but we have, again, because of the COVID, we've had to do a lot of these things online, where typically these types of projects, you would have 1 or 2 meetings for the community where everyone would get together, and then those meetings would be, the results of those would be presented to the community. So here we've had to adapt. That's part of looking at resilience. How are we going to be able to hold meetings if the public can't attend? So with that, I would like to turn it over to Doug Pierce and his team with Perkins and Will, and he will sort of go over the some of the information that we found out.
Tom, thank you so much for the introduction, and welcome everyone to the town hall meeting. And before I jump into anything, I just want to thank everybody that participated in the workshops, the focus groups, all those things. It was really great to have your participation, and it was absolutely vital. So I hope you see things that you are hoping to see tonight relative to what came out of those workshops. And we're looking forward to your continued participation. The planning is far from over. We have a ways to go, and we're going to be seeking more of your advice and your highly valued input. So just a quick rundown on the agenda. Tom gave us an introduction. I'm going to do a very brief resilience plan overview. I'm going to touch on just a bit of the reference data that we used in the workshops in case you were not part of the workshops. I'll pause for some Q&A. And on the Q&A, please use the question and answer that's part of Zoom. And Tom's going to man that. He's going to be watching the Q&A. Share questions anytime you like. And then part 2, I'm going to go through the survey, the public survey feedback, and some of the workshop outcomes. And then Stephanie's going to close the meeting out with some Cedar Falls sort of current activities and things that Cedar Falls has going that relates to the topic and the topics at hand. So this the town hall is a moderated discussion. We're doing written Q&A. Differing opinions are welcome. Please offer them respectfully. We'll collect all the comments in the Q&A. You may not see all questions shared if they're duplicative or if they're disrespectful. So now for a quick, I'm going to do kind of a quick overview, particularly for those of you that haven't participated in the workshops. So we organized the planning process into 2 themes: built environment and ecology, community and local economy. And we're very aware that these two themes have a lot of interaction with each other. And as we pull the plan together, we'll be thinking of this as a holistic fabric of things that interact and intertwine with each other. So we've been in the discovery phase, as Tom talked about, since September. We're really sort of closing that phase tonight with the summary of our findings. And the intention for the discovery phase was to really understand the context of the plan and where the plan wanted to go to, and most importantly, to hear from you, to hear from the community, to understand your perspectives, what you see as important, to hear the specific topics and challenges and opportunities that you intimately know. We wanted to hear that. And then after that, we'll actually start really developing the plan. And there'll be some opportunities for more engagement in the future. We have public worksheets, online public worksheets that are a form of survey, sort of scheduled for December, January, and February, an open house in late March when we have the plan mostly pulled together. And then a final resilience plan will be published hopefully at the end of April. So the project vision is to really empower the community to improve quality of life, build prosperity, and enhance community resilience. And there are some key drivers that are part of the plan. One is that it's comprehensive, and I think you can see how that's showing up in all the workshops and the variety of topics that it includes. The plan is to be science-based, so we're trying to be as grounded in knowledge and data as we possibly can be. It's to be innovative and forward-looking. One of the key goals is to achieve deep emission reductions. That's a vital part of the plan. And there's some overarching themes that we're looking at: adaptation, mitigation, and of course, resilience. Benefits framing: how do the things that are part of the plan impact individuals and the society or community in positive ways? Social equity is very important. And then identifying partnerships that can help bring the plan forward and bring it to life over the next many years. Just a general sort of definition of resilience. We get a lot of questions about what resilience is. And the Rockefeller Foundation has identified 4 resilience dimensions: health and well-being, economy and society, infrastructure and environment, and leadership and strategy. It is, in fact, a very comprehensive way of thinking about the world. And resilient communities are shock resistant, healthy, sustainable, adaptive, and regenerative. Regenerative in that they can rebuild after a shock. That can take months, even years for that to happen. And we want to set the stage for that to be an opportunity for Cedar Falls. And then they're resilient through diversity, which is diversity of all kinds: energy, water, culture, ideas. It really doesn't matter. Those are some of the key principles of resilience. So now I want to go through, just lightly touch on some of the reference information that was part of the workshops, a little bit on weather and climate, a little on social economic indicators, place and opportunity. If you want to see more detail on the reference information that I'm showing, we do have videos online, and you can go to the workshop page at cfresilience.com and check out the introductory video if you'd like to see more detail. So I'll touch just a little bit on weather and climate. One of the important factors that's been occurring is that we're seeing an increase in temperature. And this graph starts to show that sort of general increase in the overall atmosphere. And what's happening is that increase in temperature is drawing more moisture into the atmosphere, and that's actually driving more energy into the atmosphere. The atmosphere is actually sort of more charged and more energized, and that's causing more extreme weather events. And you can see this graph on the screen is actually it's been put together by the insurance industry and some credit rating agencies such as Standards & Poor. And you can see across the bottom that the red bars show the activity in earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes. The arrow that's sloping upwards is the actual number of extreme weather events. It's not dollar amount, it's the number of extreme weather events. And you can see how much they've been increasing since the 1980s. And of course, just this summer, as Tom mentioned, you were hit with a major event. This is the result of a warming atmosphere. More moisture in the atmosphere actually drove the power into the Plain States to drive this derecho across Iowa into Illinois, and it did almost $7.6 billion of damage. We're also seeing increased extreme precipitation events, almost a 42% increase in the actual amount of rain that falls during extreme events. And that's important to Cedar Falls because it is putting Cedar Falls at risk of urban flash flooding. You've been doing a great job of working with your riverine flooding topics and issues and mitigating that. The next step is to start dealing with urban flash flooding. I want to share a few socioeconomic indicators. These are important to the sort of social health of our community and to your community. Overall, what we're seeing in the past almost 50 years is that the income of middle income Americans has dropped from 62% to 43% of the overall aggregate income of the US GDP. And the upper incomes have seen a gain of 29 to 48%. It's a pretty dramatic shift in equity. And the white population has consistently had a higher income value than the Black population, and you can see those trend lines on the sheet. So that's inequity causes some friction in our society. You can also see in Cedar Falls that you do have some poverty. In the lower right-hand corner, the most recent number is 19.3%. However, I think that's probably skewed due to your college population. Waterloo has about 17%. So there is some poverty in the community and in the county. There's also racial inequity throughout the upper Midwest. You can see our rankings by state at a national level. And Minneapolis-St. Paul is actually ranked the fourth worst for racial inequity in the US. Cedar Falls, Waterloo area is third, and Milwaukee is first. So we have a regional challenge that we're faced with in terms of racial inequity. And one of the things that has been, that's understood about racial or all types of inequity, social inequity, economic inequity, is that countries that are unequal have greater health and social problems. And that cuts across all members of society. And it touches on a whole series of very important components and higher levels of equality actually improve everyone's quality of life. Here are some current unemployment figures. These are just from August. This is really generated by COVID-19. And you can see that construction employment is down significantly along with leisure and hospitality. So those are some things to think about in terms of regenerating and what might be required to economically regenerate Cedar Falls as we find our way out of the pandemic. Now, in terms of place, I want to share a little bit on what we found about Cedar Falls and some of the topics that need to be addressed. The chart I'm showing you on the screen is actually a global figure, and what we've seen is a 52% decline in wildlife population globally since 1970. It's a significant loss of wildlife, and more locally, what we're seeing is a loss in important insects, in pollinators. The rusty patch bumblebee is now an endangered species in the Midwest, and monarchs are threatened. So that's something to take a look at. And basically, the rusty patch is really sort of making its best homes in urban areas like Cedar Falls. And then in terms of one of the topics that really surfaced as being important to folks in Cedar Falls is walkability and bikeability. So I want to show you just a little bit of information on that. You can see that Cedar Falls is car dependent like other Iowa cities. Cedar Falls ranks about, in terms of your walk score, you have a walk score of about 38 and a bike score of about 57. Preferably, you'd be up in that 70, 80 range. And of course, 100 is perfect. So that's an area to look at and a space in which Cedar Falls can sort of move forward in the future. A little bit on your energy usage. This pie chart starts to show where most of the energy in Cedar Falls is used. You can see residential is your leading energy user, followed by commercial buildings, then you and you have a little bit of industrial use as well. And the Cedar Falls energy burden, the cost of energy relative to income falls mostly on the poorer populations, the lower income populations in town. You can see there's a significant percentage of their income is spent on heating and cooling and their lighting bill relative to everyone else. That's an area that could use some work. In terms of taking a look at where the city wants to go, we looked back at the comprehensive plan that was put together in 2012, took a look at the vision that was mapped out. And this vision was really developed with community input, and we want to build from that and move forward on that. And there's three really key topics that show up. One is managing infrastructure, and that's very much related to urban flash flooding, riverine flooding, those types of things. Attracting more business and industry, and then increasing sustainability efforts. So those three components are really wrapped up nicely inside this resilience plan. And here's a little bit more detail from that vision that also ties nicely to the topics that we saw coming out of the workshops. So a few of them are encouraging new and existing business and industry to thrive, and then finding appropriate geographical areas for development, and then managing and minimizing sprawl. So we saw those types of topics showing up through the workshops, and then nurturing entrepreneurship. So there's very much an entrepreneurial spirit in Cedar Falls, and that shows up as a goal. And we even see that showing up in the surveys. And then optimizing the development and construction of new homes, and providing for sort of home improvement and new growth, hopefully in existing neighborhoods that already have infrastructure. So Cedar Falls is really, you're really a very thriving, resourceful, and optimistic community. You have really wonderful institutions. You've got great knowledge in town. You've got just fantastic resources. So, from our perspective, Cedar Falls has a lot to look forward in the future, and you've got a lot to sort of build from, and really sort of create and continue to create a great community. And I'm going to stop there and see if there are any question and answers that I can respond to, or others can respond to. I don't see any on the chart. I'm going to stop for about 20 seconds and just let folks think and see if you have anything you want to post. All right, I'm gonna keep moving us forward. And so what I'd like to do is get into the survey and the workshop outcomes. So please, as I'm going through it, post any questions that you might have. And obviously we have a comment which I have to pass along. No question at the moment, but this is really interesting. Thank you, I appreciate that. All right, so let's do built environment and ecology. So Tom shared the different workshop topics. I'll just do a quick refresher. We had ecology, land, and habitat. That was actually our first public workshop. Water, weather, and flooding, and energy, mobility, and transportation. So I'm going to touch on the built-in environment ecology public survey, and then follow that with sort of key outcomes from the workshops. So as Tom discussed, we had 285 people that responded to the built environment and ecology survey. We feel like that was a really nice, robust response. And we kept the surveys intentionally sort of short and fairly quick so that we could get a good response. And for the most part, almost everybody that did a survey filled out every question. So it was, in that terms, it was, we felt like it was pretty successful. So I'll just jump right into the questions and the responses that we received. So the first question on built environment was, if readily available, would you be interested in an energy or water audit for your home, business, or institution to identify savings opportunities? We got a really great response on this. There were 206 people that said, yes, I would be interested in that. It's almost 72% of the folks that took the survey. It was one of our best responses out of all the survey questions. And CFU does have an audit program, but what this is sort of pointing to is really sort of dialing that up if at all possible. So there's a lot of interest in that, and I think that's really encouraging, particularly given the fact that energy savings, saving energy is actually a key component of sort of reducing climate impacts. The next question, if readily available, would you be interested in voluntarily subscribing to a local community solar power program for your home, business, or institution? Now, we took this question and sort of broke it down around some economic indicators about costs for doing that, as you can start to read down the list, and sort of trying to sort out what tolerance folks had for potential, if there were any increased costs, what it might be, and what the appetite is for it. So you can see at the top, about 20% of the folks that responded said this was really not something they were interested in. But we did get a really great, just straight, simple yes response of almost 36%. And then once we get below just a straight yes, there are some granular sort of feedback. Paybacks of up to 15 years, paybacks of less than 5 years, really nice response there, almost 20%. Yes, if the impact is negligible. And then you can see it sliced a little differently. 5% additional cost is okay, 6%, 10, and 20. And just to let you know, each one of these, you can only answer this once. So really there are 80% of the population that's essentially answered yes, they would subscribe if they had an opportunity or an expanded opportunity. CFU does have a program in place. So please make sure and toss any questions you have into the Q&A. Would love to hear any of your questions. So here's the next question. If well supported, which of the following mobility strategies would you be interested in increasing your use of post-COVID? So what mobility strategies would you be interested in after COVID settles down? And select all that apply. So this was just like click any of them that you would really be interested in. Walking came right up to the top with a 60+%. Biking very high. Public transit and car sharing dropped off some, and you can see there's some strong interest in electric vehicles. We ask an open-ended question about, do you bike for basic mobility during the day? The answer was generally no, but there was interest in being able to do that. So the next question was, which best describes your thinking about the weather? We just wanted to kind of find out if people were feeling like there were weather changes, could they see them? Were they visible to them? And about a third, a little less than a third, said the weather is about the same as it's always been. About 2/3 said the weather has overall become more severe. And out of that 2/3, more than almost 51% said that the weather's becoming more severe over time, and I expect it to get more extreme in the future. So that helps us know that folks are they're in tune with the fact that statistically the weather is changing, and that we can have some good dialogues about that, and you're recognizing those kinds of changes and potentially the impacts they have on the city and the built environment and crops and plants. Next question. Would you be interested in increasing the biodiversity, edible landscaping, and production gardening around your home and neighborhood? Did get a couple questions about what production gardening is. It's basically growing food, food gardening of any types. So there was a really positive response to this. Biodiversity was over 60%. There was interest in that. Edible landscaping, almost 50%. Yes to production gardening, over 40, and a sort of no, not really interested at about 20%. So 3/4 of the population has an interest in that kind of dialogue and sort of moving into that space. So the last question we had was actually in the survey was a sort of a robust question looking for and asking for what folks saw as being critical. And so we said, rank these items 1 to 5, with 5 being the most critical. And you can see the orange in the everybody that identified things as being a 5 or very critical is up in this orange band. So we've got adapting to climate change on the far left, taking actions to reduce carbon emissions, improving transit and mobility. Then it's adapting to extreme weather conditions, adapting to reducing urban flash flooding, and then taking action to reduce the loss of biodiversity. And there's generally, a good solid above 40% of folks in town that took the survey basically agreed that these topics were either important or critical. So you've got a really solid group of citizens that are looking at these topics as being critical. The green is actually folks that are saying these are not so important. So those that sort of group that's not seeing these as important topics is probably falling in the 15 to 18% category.
We do have a question.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, there's the person asked if there's any plans to talk about more charging stations and a push towards more electric car friendliness, or being more electric car friendly.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say generally where we're at right now in development of the plan is that's something to be looked at. It's certainly something that's on the table in terms of reviewing. Right now in the plan, we haven't really established any solutions or absolute actions. We've just been sort of collecting input from the community. And the next phase is actually to determine sort of things that we actually want to build right into the plan. I know there's interest in that, and there's conversations at CFU about electric vehicles and things like that. So exactly where that heads to, we don't know just yet. That'll be all the items that we're talking about will be sort of under development over the next few months. And I don't know if Stephanie, or Tom, if you have any thoughts on that.
I was going to mention that I am currently working with several other communities in Eastern Iowa looking at a electronic vehicle plan to try to support the use of electronic vehicles, to find locations where where more charging stations may be needed, and just to support the use of electronic vehicles, and both the pure electronic battery charged and the other ones within the Eastern Iowa area.
Yeah, and I just want to add that when I say those are things that to be looked at, I'm not trying to be evasive, but we're just sort of in this. We're just ending the discovery phase right now, and then the next step, literally starting next week, is to say, okay, what kinds of actions are we going to start taking? And we'll be looking for your feedback on those as we go forward. So I want to shift over to the public workshops that were part of this sort of theme on the built environment and ecology, and give you some sort of standing on where those things were. There's a lot of information on the screen. You'll see several slides like this. I want to give you a little sort of breakdown on how what you're seeing. Basically, there's a question at the top, and most of these questions are framed around, please identify items that you think are very important and write them into the workshop tool that we had. So most of these items, and I'll share with you any of these questions where we preloaded the questions, we being the planning team. Otherwise, these questions and these suggestions are things that came from members of the community in the workshops. We asked folks to type things in, offer their ideas, and then basically to rank or prioritize the items that other community members had typed in. So we said, prioritize them around the lines of very important, somewhat important, or not too important. And this little stack in the middle where it says V%, that's the percentage of folks that responded to this that said the item was very important. And you can see the numbers, trying to be transparent here of who was, very important, somewhat important, or not important. So at the top of this one, risk and concerns around ecology, land, and habitat. At the top of this was a lack of diverse vegetation that assists in water retention and creates habitat. That's followed by water quality, then urban sprawl, reducing green areas in the city. And you can see we've sort of bolded the top three, and then the top five are listed, and then sometimes there's a couple more that are shown below. Many times there were a lot more items included, but to sort of make this manageable for tonight, we just sort of said, what are the top 5 to 7 items that came in? And you can see loss of prairie habitat folds in, and then concerns about lawns and parks that discourage biodiversity. So the next one flips this from risks and concerns to actions and opportunities around the same topic. And you can see at the very top of this is develop planning, zoning, building codes that are more ecological and habitat sensitive. So almost 83% of the folks that responded to this gave this a very important thumbs up. And that's really tied with changing the development pattern, implement smart growth policies. And once again, I just want to reiterate, these are items that were offered by members of the community and then sort of prioritized by that same group. The third one down is careful planning and design of new walkable neighborhoods with needed businesses and services within easy reach, prairie restoration, and then implement biodiversity in green space. So those are the sort of top 5 that came out of the public land unit. There's more information that came out of it. We actually have a robust amount of information, far too much than we can share tonight. So I'm just sort of taking the cream off the crop and sharing what that is. And by the way, I just want to say Matt Metzger, who is our water resources engineer, is quietly sitting online tonight. So if you have any water resource questions, he's a really great civil engineer, really understands urban flash flooding, et cetera. If you have any questions for him, type them in and we'll ask Matt what those, he can respond to your questions. And also, if you go to the workshop, Water, Weather, and Urban Flooding, we have a Vimeo video that Matt did. It's about 30 minutes long and it goes through a much deeper dive on all the indicators and the data that are supporting where we're headed. Okay, so water. Got a couple slides here. Once again, risks and concerns. How is Cedar Falls vulnerable to flash flooding? Now, these are items that we as a team pre-populated. So we did this workshop just a little bit different. We loaded the items up and then we asked the folks in the workshop to basically prioritize this. Basement flooding rose to the top, followed by concern of economically vulnerable populations in neighborhoods. And the third one was critical infrastructure. And then pollutants released due to flooding. And at the end, sanitary system infiltration and inflows. So you can sort of see the ranking that folks gave in terms of their concerns to the items that we pre-populated in this particular question. And then we also pre-populated this one, prioritize how flood risk reduction and resilience efforts should be prioritized. So what should the priorities be as we move forward and as we sort of develop the plan? At the top of this was risk and impact, came surface to the top. Equity and vulnerable populations followed, and then benefit and cost. And then moving into energy, Becky Alexander is our carbon and energy specialist. So Becky's not able to join us tonight, but if you want to see sort of a deep dive into the energy numbers for Cedar Falls, Becky has been working with the CEE and at UNI to pull together data and information about Cedar Falls, and that's in a Vimeo video in the Energy, Mobility, and Transportation workshop. So this is some information we got came out of that workshop, and the energy is an important part of the plan. So I've got about 4 slides here. They're pretty granular, and we pre-populated most of these questions and then asked for prioritization. In this case, just simple, does this apply? Should it be in the framework? And that's the question. Which of the following energy strategies should be included in the Cedar Falls Resilience Plan and Framework? So once again, we pre-populated this. Basically, folks said, yes, it should or not. Improving energy efficiency of existing homes rose to the top, followed by renewable electricity generated within Cedar Falls, and then improving energy efficiency of non-residential buildings, followed by reducing emissions from Cedar Falls utility, and then increasing efficiency of new construction. So those were sort of the priorities that came out of the public workshop for, or things to include in the plan. And then we ask, what should Cedar Falls' top priority be for improving mobility? Once again, walkability popped to the top, just as it did in the public survey, followed by biking, and then electric vehicles. Telecommuting follows that, and then planning zones and rules to add more commercial opportunities within the walking distance neighborhoods. And then we asked folks to prioritize which of the following materials and waste strategies. We're actually working on recycling as part of the emissions reduction, and reducing single use plastics came to the top. Then it's just generally increased recycling, and then composting and organics recycling. And what role should the city of Cedar Falls play in advancing resilience strategies for the community? Once again, we had pre-populated this, and the top item here is implement policies that support community-wide changes. So it's a sort of big sweeping approach. That one came to the top, providing education and encouragement, followed with partnering with neighboring communities and regional organizations, taking action in areas that directly under direct city control, and then advocating for statewide changes. So those are the things that, so you can see the order of prioritization that folks gave to those topics. So with that, I'm going to shift over to community and local economy. So this really covered, community cohesion and civic services, equity, diversity, well-being, jobs, business, and local economy, sort of in that general order is how we ran the workshop. So I'm going to start with the public survey and then go through the public workshop outcomes as well. So there were 190 folks that took the community and local economics survey, and I'll just jump right into the questions. So we're trying to get an understanding of where folks are relative to jobs and economics, of course, and social equity. So these are sort of big questions, just trying to get a feel for where everybody is so we can start to really identify actionable items that we can take around these topics. So here's the first question. Prior to COVID-19, if you worked to earn money for essential needs, how many jobs did you work? So you can see 65% of the folks that responded to the survey said they worked one job. And then you had about 12% or so that were doing two, and then tapered off really fast, 3% at 3, and just a few people that were working more than 3 jobs. At least for the folks that responded to the survey, most of them are doing one job. And then prior to COVID-19, did you do a significant amount of work to provide essential needs in other ways than directly earning money or working for an employer? So were you, vegetable gardening, child rearing, maintaining a household, caregiving, those kinds of essential needs? And it's almost a split between yes or no, almost a perfect split. Interesting response to see what sort of came in out of that number or out of that sort of survey question.
Doug, before we go further, there was a question that related back to the energy area, and the question was the issue of light pollution discussed? And because this is closely related to a reduction in energy consumption.
Yeah, good question. We didn't ask it directly, and I believe it was brought up in one of the workshops. And I know that we will be looking at overall energy use for utilities, when your lighting, street lightings, all those things would be part of that. And we can definitely sort of add that into the list of topics. It's actually it also has a relationship with biodiversity. The critters like to sleep too, so light pollution has multiple facets to it, along with the energy efficiency. It's a biodiversity and a critter topic as well. So thanks for bringing that forward. So next question: if you do not operate your own organization, enterprise, or business, would you like to? So we're trying to sort of sort out what kind of entrepreneurial sort of spirit there is going around. Or would you like to turn a part-time venture into a full-time? 25% of the folks that responded said yes. About 43 said no, and about 30% said it really wasn't applicable to them. So you have a pretty good cohort of folks in town that are really sort of interested in have that sort of entrepreneurial bug. And that's important to sort of take a look at in terms of how you nurture that. Next question: prior to COVID-19, did all members of your household have access to healthy food, safe housing, transportation, healthcare, education, emergency savings? Most people said yes. You had about 8% that responded to the survey that said no. And then similar topic: is your family having economic struggles due to the pandemic? And you've got about 13% here that responded said yes. The majority said no. And then which statement most accurately reflects your thinking about COVID-19? In this case, we're trying to understand, how long do people think the challenges that we see might go on? What kinds of impacts might they have? And the responses were really, pretty interesting. We set up some different scenarios. The first one being the pandemic will be mostly over with a return to normal starting early next year. About 17%, 18% mark that as a yes. Followed by return to normal starting by the end of 2021, mid 2022, about 14%. After this, all the questions flipped over to a noticeably different environment after the pandemic. 11% said yes, it'll be noticeably different, over by early next year, which would be coming up soon. And then 25% saying noticeably different by 2021, 2022, it'll be over. And then the last one, COVID-19 may never really go away, but noticeable impacts, almost 30%. So at least 50, 60% range of folks are saying, maybe a little bit more than that, are saying they are expecting a noticeably different sort of in terms of how the world might look after the pandemic, with different timeframes on how fast they think it will settle in or settle down. Next question: are you aware of any systemic inequality and unfair practice that is present in the community, either intentional or unintentional? So this is systemic inequality. And this is split sort of down the middle as well. About roughly half said no, and about half said yes. And we identified some sort of indicators of where or how that might be. We have social settings, business settings, and inequitable policies and practices, which seems to be the highest sort of indicator according to the cohort of people that responded. And then the last sort of question in this grouping was: how important is it that as a community, we take action in the following areas to maintain or improve the quality of life and stability of Cedar Falls? Once again, this was a ranked question, one being not important, orange is critical, and similar sorts of percentages that we saw with the built environment question. So the question on the left is take action on quality wage jobs. The next one is action to advance, strengthen, and diversify the local economy. The next one is action on social and economic fair and resilient unity, and then action on adaptations to support public health, including COVID-19. And once again, sort of a similar sort of percentage of responses in terms of what's critical or what's what's not as important. So now I'm going to shift over to the public workshop responses. Once again, same sort of setup you saw previously. Now, these questions were open questions, more so than the energy or the water, in that we basically solicited folks to write in their ideas. We said, we want you as the workshop members to list risks and concerns. And in this case, it was jobs, business, and economy. And then rank those concerns as they come in. So we've got at the top of this was a need to better support small businesses and help them with continuity planning. This is relative to COVID-19. And the next one is over support or too much support for large stores coming to Cedar Falls versus small business. And then the third one was Cedar Falls can tend to view itself as separate from the rest of Cedar Valley. And the question goes on to sort of, we should be, view ourselves as a bigger and be more inclusive in terms of being part of the Cedar Valley. And then there are negative stereotypes surrounding low income. And then a question about vacant retail space, yet we're seeing new buildings. And by the way, we tried not to change the statements much, since they came directly from participants in the workshops. We tried to leave them unedited for the most part. And then action and opportunities coming to the top of this. And also I'd like to say, some of these things are, some of the items that came up have a long history. They are wicked problems. And they're listed here, how much or how extensive Cedar Falls can immediately engage or resolve some of these, I think is a really important question. So back to the idea, we're not making any statements about this is in the plan or these items are in the plan, but there's certainly things to be discussed. So the one on the top is city money should be made available as reparations to African-American community to make up for past harms. The next one is support inexpensive green transportation options. And number 3 is public transportation should favor our small businesses. And then the fourth one that popped up was provide grants for new minority small business owners in Cedar Falls. And then shifting over to equity, we have basically risks and concerns. And the one that rose to the top here is concern with extremes of inequality on housing, education, employment, and justice. And I should point out something. The online facilitation tool that we were using appears to have potentially recorded the participant count incorrectly on this particular activity. So we're looking at that to see what if that number is actually accurate. Concern with extremes of inequality or housing, education, employment, and justice came to the top, followed by affordable housing, including voices of all types in leadership roles, accessible public transportation options, and then racial prejudice. And then you can see the next frame on, or the next question was about actions and opportunities, and diversity and leadership came to the top here. And then racial balance on all boards. Implicit bias training for all was third. And then on community, in the community group, once again, risk and concern. These are items, once again, that were posted by the community members. At the top of this is diversity in workforce is much lower than the rest of the metro area as a whole, followed by highly segregated neighborhoods and housing products being a risk and concern, then followed by a lack of diversity in leadership, and a lack of services for resources for low income, and then kind of dealing with special interest relative to limiting sustainable development in certain ways. And then actions and opportunities. So at the top of this one, more collaboration with Waterloo, followed by positive interaction with public safety personnel, and then social service and workforce development agencies, are all, they're located in Cedar Falls. Most of those are outside the city. Can we bring them in deeper into the city? And then a call for stronger arts and cultural engagement within Waterloo and Cedar Falls, and then diversity plans and participation in the Cedar Valley Economic Inclusion Network. So I know that was a lot of information. It will be recorded so you can go back and take a look at it. And that was only part of what we got back. I'm not seeing any questions. Stephanie, there's still a few minutes left if you want to jump in and close us out. And I know you had some items that you wanted to share around things that Cedar Falls already has going that sort of addresses some of these topics. Stephanie, you're on mute.
Very good, thank you. So while Doug was talking, I was writing down some of the different areas that Cedar Falls either is planning to do some work or has recently done some work. So I thought that I would just mention a couple of these because I think we do have a lot of different actions towards some of these items going on, and there's certainly always more that could be done. But for our information tonight, walkability came up as a really important topic, I think, in several of the workshops. And the city for a number of years in our capital improvements plan has had a number of infill sidewalk projects on the list. We have some in the funded list and some in the unmet needs, but we continue to have requests of areas that could use sidewalks. So that could be one way that we increase walkability. Another was with our recently completed University Avenue project, we added sidewalk and trail, and then the mall added a sidewalk connection. So we've seen some improvements in that area as well. Flash flooding was mentioned in one or two of the sessions as well, and that is not only an impact to private residents and to the roads, but also to our storm sewer lines. We are making investments slowly but surely, probably in those sewer areas that do get inundated during flash flooding. We also have in our capital improvement plan over several years, we're working on drainage studies in several neighborhoods so that as we work on permeable alley projects or as we work on road projects, we'll get appropriate infrastructure in place where it might not currently be in place. So we're trying to plan for that. We recently completed a levee improvement, which does help with the investments in our downtown area and continuing to protect those. We have participated in a county-wide hazard mitigation plan and have had that in place for a number of years. We've made changes to our floodplain regulations, again, to guard against the risks that can be present when we get close to river and streams. We have made investments in bioswales along some roads. If you drive down Waterloo Road, you'll see that in some places. Searly near Pete Junior High, you'll see some, and we'll be doing some with the Center Street project in another year here. There's just a variety of things that we've done, I think, in terms of the housing area. Our recent downtown vision plan that was adopted and our work here more recently with the College Hill Vision Plan has pointed to continuing to explore and promote housing diversity and a variety of housing styles and duplexes and that missing middle housing. So hopefully some of the elements coming out of those plans that are leading into zoning ordinance changes will help to enable some changes that way that help to address some of the comments that Doug shared. And then I think you already mentioned that CFU did spearhead the Simple Solar project a couple years ago. That was in partnership with the city out at Prairie Lakes Park. And I was just looking up quick facts, there's 6,500 panels that are in that solar park. So very proud of the start that CFU has helped us with there. So that just touches on some recent investments as well as some things that are in our capital improvement plan. And there will absolutely be more to come, and this plan will help us identify some of those as well. Now Tom's on mute.
Yeah, Stephanie,
I thought
thanks
I'd
so
done.
much for that.
Okay. We have an additional question that someone wants to know if the slides are currently accessible to the public, and if so, where? So I don't know, is there a way that someone could get the presentation?
They could get the presentation via video. So we'll be posting, let me go to the website. Let me bring that up. So we'll be posting the video of tonight's presentation on the cfresilience.com website for Cedar Falls. And it'll be, we'll post it on the front page as part of the workshop invitation. And then also, if you want to see more information, there's a video by Matt Metzger, our water resources expert, that's in the water, weather, and urban flooding. He's got about a 30-minute presentation on all the science and data and backup information, the reference information that we're using. You can watch that. Becky Alexander has a really great presentation that breaks down all the energy and emissions in and around in Cedar Falls in the energy, mobility, and transportation piece. And then I did a series of 2 or 3 different videos on an introduction to the plan, and then covering several of the topics around climate change and social equity and those topics. They actually go deeper into the information from today. So the information will basically be available in video form. So I think that puts us a little over the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for joining. Once again, we're just getting a really good start. We're ending the discovery phase. Now we're actually going to get into the plan and creating the plan. So we really look forward to further participation with you and harvesting your great ideas and your knowledge and the input that you've been providing so far. We want to keep that up. So thank you so much. And thank you, Tom, for kicking us off. Thank you, Stephanie, for the overview. And I think we're probably ready to sign off.
And I just want to add that if anyone has any other questions or comments, that they can go to the website. There's a place where you can provide comments that will come to me, and I can forward those to Doug or try to get you an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.